My name is William Anderson. I'm 65 years old, and for 40 years I worked as a maintenance supervisor at one of the largest industrial plants in Ohio. Every second of my life was dedicated to my adopted son, Jacob Harris. Jacob came to us when he was just 5 years old, a fragile boy with chronic respiratory problems that required constant medical care. My late wife Margaret and I welcomed him as if he were our own flesh and blood. Actually, he was more than that. He was our reason for living. Margaret passed away 10 years ago, a victim of cancer. Even in her final months, she made me promise I would take care of Jacob until the end. "He's special, William," she would say, holding my hand. "Promise me you'll never abandon him." I promised, and I kept that promise religiously. I worked double shifts, weekends, holidays. While other men my age were thinking about retirement, I refused any proposal to stop. Jacob needed me. His medical appointments, expensive medications, physical therapy, all of it cost a fortune, but I didn't care. He was my son. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new, unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. When Jacob married Ava at 28, I couldn't have been prouder. She was a beautiful girl, business administration graduate who seemed to genuinely care about him. The house where they lived? I bought it. Every brick of that 2-story construction in the Columbus suburbs was paid for with the sweat of my labor. "Dad," Jacob told me on the day of the deed transfer, "I don't know how to thank you." I just smiled and replied, "You don't need to thank me, son. It's what any father would do." For years, our relationship seemed solid. Jacob called regularly, visited me on holidays, always treating me with respect. Ava was also cordial, though I noticed a certain coldness in her eyes when we talked about money or the future. But I attributed that to the natural nervousness of a young wife trying to build her own life. Barbara Sterling, Ava's mother, was a successful corporate lawyer in Cleveland, an imposing woman, always dressed in expensive suits and carrying a leather briefcase that cost more than my monthly salary. From our first meeting, she looked at me like I was an old piece of furniture that needed to be discarded. "William," she said once during a Christmas dinner, "have you ever thought about retiring? Maybe it's time to let the young folks take care of themselves." I smiled politely and changed the subject, but her words kept echoing in my head. Gradually, I began to notice subtle changes. Jacob seemed more distant during phone calls. Ava was rarely home when I visited. And when she was, she always found an excuse to leave. "I need to go to the grocery store," she'd say, grabbing her keys with exaggerated haste. But the final blow came in a way I never could have imagined. After 40 years of impeccable service, my health began to decline. Back problems, the result of decades carrying heavy equipment, high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes. My doctor was clear, "William, you need to slow down or your body will make you pay the price." When I finally had to accept disability retirement at 65, my world collapsed. Not because of the end of my career, but because of Jacob's reaction. For 40 years I had been the provider, the invisible pillar that supported the entire family structure. Now, for the first time, I needed help. I called Jacob on a rainy Tuesday in November. "Son, I need to talk to you about my situation," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I come over tonight?" "Today's not a good day, Dad," he replied with a tone I had never heard before. "Ava is organizing an important meeting with some work colleagues. How about next week?" Next week never came. Every time I called, there was a different excuse. "We're traveling. Ava is sick. We have important commitments." After 3 weeks of attempts, I decided to show up at the house unannounced. When I rang the doorbell, it was Ava who answered. She didn't open the door completely, keeping the security chain on. "William, what are you doing here?" she asked, as if I were an unwanted stranger. "I need to talk to Jacob," I replied. "It's important." "He's not here," she said, looking over her shoulder, but I could see the light from the television in the living room and hear voices inside. "Ava, I know he's home. Please, I just need 5 minutes." That's when Jacob appeared behind her. The son I had raised with so much love looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. It wasn't anger. It was worse. It was contempt. "Dad, what do you want?" he asked, not even trying to disguise his irritation. "I lost my job, son. Due to health problems. I need a place to stay temporarily while I get my life organized." The silence that followed was deafening. Jacob and Ava exchanged glances, as if they were communicating through some secret code I didn't understand. "We don't have space," Jacob finally said. "The house is full. You'll have to find another solution." "Full?" I asked, incredulous. "Jacob, this house has 4 bedrooms. I helped choose the floor plan when you bought it." "When we bought it," Ava corrected, emphasizing the pronoun. "The house is ours now." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "I paid for this house," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "Every payment came out of my pocket." "That was a gift," Jacob replied coldly. "You said yourself it was what any father would do. Now the house is ours, and we decide who comes in and who doesn't." It was at that moment that Barbara Sterling appeared in the living room. She had been there the whole time, listening to our conversation. She approached the door with that condescending smile I knew well. "William," she said, adjusting her designer glasses, "you need to understand that Jacob and Ava are adults now. They have their own responsibilities and can't carry dead weight for the rest of their lives." Dead weight. The words came out of her mouth like poison. 40 years of hard work to support this family, I replied, my voice now firmer. 40 years paying all the bills, all the medications, all the necessities, and now I'm dead weight? "You did what was your obligation as a father," Barbara said, crossing her arms. "That doesn't give you the right to be a parasite for the rest of your life." "Jacob has the right to his own life." Parasite. The word echoed in my head like a gunshot. "Dad," Jacob said, avoiding my gaze, "you need to be more independent. Look into social services, Social Security, some assistance program. We can't solve all your problems." I looked at the son I had raised, for whom I had dedicated every day of the last 40 years, and I didn't recognize the person standing before me. The fragile boy who had arrived at 5 years old, with respiratory problems and fear of the dark, had transformed into a cruel stranger. "I understand," I said, taking a step back. "Thank you for making the situation very clear." "No need to be dramatic," Ava said, rolling her eyes. "It's just real life. Everyone has to grow up sometime." I walked back to my car in silence. My hands were shaking when I put the key in the ignition. 40 years of sacrifice, unconditional love, working until exhaustion, summarized in 3 words. Dead weight, parasite, useless. But as I drove back to my small rented apartment, something strange happened. Instead of despair, I felt an icy calm taking over me. Because Jacob, Ava, and Barbara Sterling didn't know something very important about me. They didn't know that the dead weight they had just humiliated had accumulated, over 40 years of hard work and smart investments, exactly $3 million in stocks and investment funds. And they definitely didn't know about the contract Jacob had signed 5 years ago, when I helped pay off his house. The contract was something I had insisted on when I helped Jacob completely pay off his house 5 years ago. At the time, he thought it was funny. "Dad, you want me to sign a paper saying I'll take care of you when you get old?" He laughed. "Of course I'll take care of you. You're my father." "It's just a formality," I explained at the time. "Something to protect us legally." Barbara Sterling was present that day and even praised my legal prudence. She herself reviewed the document and said it was perfectly drafted. The contract was simple but clear. In exchange for full payment of the house, Jacob committed to providing adequate care in my old age, including housing when necessary. The penalty for non-compliance was the full return of the property's value, with interest and monetary correction. At the time, that represented $250,000. Today, with the property's appreciation, we were talking about almost $400,000. For 3 days after the humiliation at the door of the house I had paid for, I remained silent, organizing my thoughts. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something colder, more calculated. It was justice. The following Thursday, I called Michael Brennan, a family law attorney I knew through the factory unions. "Mike," I said, "I need to sue my own son." "Jesus, William," he replied. "What happened?" I explained the entire situation, from my forced retirement to the humiliation at the front door. Mike listened in silence, asking a few technical questions. "Do you have the original contract?" he asked. "I do. Signed, notarized, with 2 witnesses. And evidence of the refusal to shelter you?" "I can get it. I have the text messages where he made up excuses and 3 neighbors saw our argument at the door." "William," Mike said, his voice becoming more serious, "are you sure about this? Suing a son isn't something that can be easily undone. He made his choice, Mike. Now I make mine." While Mike prepared the legal documentation, I began my own discreet investigation. I discovered that Jacob had been bragging at work about finally getting rid of the old man. A colleague of his, Tom Martinez, who had known our family for years, was so shocked by the comments that he sought me out personally. "Mr. Anderson," Tom said, clearly uncomfortable, "I know it's none of my business, but Jacob has been saying some things at the office that, well, don't match the man I thought he was." "What has he been saying, Tom?" "That you were trying to take advantage of him. That you had always been a burden in his life. That he was finally going to have freedom to live without having to support a parasite." Tom made air quotes saying the last word. "Sorry, Mr. Anderson. I know those words must hurt. Thank you for telling me, Tom. This is very important." Tom agreed to serve as a witness if necessary, as did 2 of Jacob's neighbors who witnessed our argument at the door and were shocked by the treatment I received. A week later, Mike called. "William, we have a solid case. The contract is valid, the evidence is clear, and the refusal to comply with the terms is well documented. Do you want to proceed?" "I do." "Is there anything else you need to tell me?" Mike asked. "Any detail that might affect the case?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "I have $3 million in investments that they don't know exist." The silence on the other end of the line lasted almost 10 seconds. "$3 million?" Mike repeated, incredulous. 40 years of investing 20% of every paycheck, Mike. Stock in the company where I worked, growth funds, some conservative investments. I never touched that money. It was supposed to be Jacob's inheritance. Was? Now it's my comfortable retirement and my guarantee of independence." When Jacob received the court summons, the reaction was exactly what I expected. He called me screaming. "Have you lost your mind?" he yelled into the phone. "You're suing me over a piece of paper I don't even remember signing?" "You do remember, Jacob. Your mother-in-law even reviewed the document. This is ridiculous. I'm calling Barbara right now. She'll put an end to this nonsense in 5 minutes." "Feel free," I replied calmly. "Mike Brennan is waiting." Barbara Sterling called 2 hours later. Her voice had the same condescending tone as always, but I detected a slight concern behind the arrogance. "William, this is a pathetic attempt to manipulate my son-in-law. You know this lawsuit won't amount to anything." "Maybe," I replied, "but it'll be interesting to find out. Look, let's resolve this like civilized adults. Jacob can give you $500 a month for a year. It's more than you deserve, considering you're the one who chose not to plan adequately for retirement." "No, Barbara. We'll resolve this in court." "You're making a terrible mistake," she said, her voice becoming more threatening. "I can sue you for harassment, for defamation, for attempted extortion. I have resources you can't even imagine." "I'm sure you do," I replied. "See you in court." When I hung up the phone for the first time in weeks, I smiled. They still had no idea what was coming. The trial was scheduled for a cold Tuesday in January. I arrived at the courthouse 20 minutes early, wearing my best suit, the same one I wore to Jacob's wedding. Mike Brennan was waiting for me at the entrance with a briefcase full of documents. "Are you ready for this, William?" he asked. "I've never been more ready in my life." Jacob, Ava, and Barbara Sterling arrived 5 minutes late, clearly confident. Barbara wore an Armani suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary. She greeted the judge as if they were old friends, which they might have been, considering Cleveland's social circles. "Your Honor," Barbara began, "this is a regrettable case of an elderly man trying to extort money from a hard-working son. The alleged contract in question is an obscure document signed under emotional pressure. Mike stood up calmly. Your Honor, we have here a valid contract, voluntarily signed by both parties, notarized with witnesses. There's nothing obscure or emotional about this document. The judge, Honorable Robert Chen, examined the papers carefully. Ms. Sterling, were you present when this contract was signed? Barbara hesitated for a moment. I was, Your Honor, but only as an observer. And did you review the document? Briefly, yes. And did you find any legal irregularities at the time? Another moment of hesitation. No, Your Honor. Mike presented the evidence systematically. The original contract, the text messages where Jacob made up excuses not to see me, the testimonies of witnesses who witnessed my humiliation at the front door, Tom Martinez's testimony about the derogatory comments Jacob made at work. When it was Jacob's turn to testify, he was visibly nervous. Mr. Harris, Mike asked, do you remember signing this contract? Vaguely, Jacob replied, avoiding my gaze. Vaguely? You signed a legal document involving your house, valued at $400,000, and you only vaguely remember? It was a long time ago. 5 years, Mr. Harris, and were you under any kind of coercion when you signed? No, but thank you. Now, when your father sought your help after losing his job due to health problems, what was your response? Jacob looked desperately at Barbara, who made a discreet gesture for him to remain calm. I said we didn't have space. In a 4-bedroom house? We use the extra bedrooms as an office and other things. Other things, I see. And when your father mentioned that he had paid for this house, what did you respond? That it was a gift. A gift that now has a value of $400,000, correct? Yes. And at any point did you offer alternative help to your father? Temporary financial assistance? Help finding housing? Anything? Jacob remained silent for almost a minute. No. When it was my turn to testify, I spoke with the same calm I had maintained throughout the entire process. Your Honor, I worked 40 years to give my son the best life possible. I paid for his education, his medications, his house. I never asked for anything in return except what any father expects, a minimum of respect and care in old age. I didn't receive even that. Barbara tried one last gambit during her closing argument. Your Honor, Mr. Anderson is trying to transform paternal generosity into legal obligation. No father should be able to force a son to— Mrs. Sterling, the judge interrupted. You yourself reviewed this contract and considered it valid. You cannot now argue its invalidity. The sentence was clear and direct. Judge Chen determined that Jacob had violated the contract terms and should pay $350,000 in damages, plus court costs. The house could be seized if payment wasn't made within 90 days. Jacob's face turned white. Ava began to cry. Barbara Sterling, for the first time since I'd known her, was completely speechless. But I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt relief. After the trial, I used part of the settlement money to buy a small cozy house in Clearwater, Florida. A little 2-bedroom house with an ocean view, where I wake up every day hearing the sound of waves. With my $3 million properly invested, I have a comfortable monthly income. I volunteer at the local library, teach basic math to adults, and for the first time in 40 years, I live for myself. 6 months after the trial, Jacob showed up at my door. He was thinner, with deep dark circles, clearly desperate. Dad, he said, his voice choked. I made a terrible mistake. Forgive me. I need your help. I looked at the man who was once my son, the man who called me a parasite and dead weight, the man who slammed the door in my face when I needed him most. Jacob, I replied calmly, you made your choices. Now I make mine. Dad, please. Ava left me. I lost my job. I'm losing the house. You're the only family I have left. No, I said, slowly closing the door. You made it very clear to me that I wasn't family. I was just dead weight. Today, 3 years later, I live in peace. I wake up when I want, read the books I always wanted to read, walk on the beach, talk with neighbors who respect me for who I am. not for what I can give. Sometimes I get calls from Jacob. I never answer, not out of revenge, but out of self-preservation. I learned that even the kindest heart needs to learn to protect itself. My story isn't about revenge. It's about dignity. It's about recognizing that caring for those who don't value us is a way of destroying ourselves. It's about understanding that self-love isn't selfishness. It's survival. And to any father or mother watching this who recognizes themselves in my story, you deserve respect, you deserve gratitude, and you deserve, above all, to choose your own happiness. Because I, William Anderson, at 68 years old, finally learned that the greatest inheritance we can leave ungrateful children isn't money. It's the lesson that choices have consequences. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment telling what you thought. And if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe and hit the bell icon to receive notifications of new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.